For years, Canadians have heard of major problems with 24 Sussex Drive, and for years, successive governments have opted not to deal with those major issues. The problems have been so bad that two prime ministers now have chosen to live at an entirely separate residence. I'm Dave Breckenridge, and this is 10-3. National Post reporter Simon Tuck joins me to discuss the problems with the prime minister's residence, why repairs have been put off for so long, and how much it could cost for an extreme home makeover. Don't forget, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music. I'd love it if you could leave us a rating, a review, and tell your friends about the show. So, Simon, you recently looked at the state of 24 Sussex Drive in a lengthy feature for nationalpost.com. And for people who may be living under a rock, or may forget, as it hasn't necessarily been in the headlines as much in the last decade or so. What is 24 Sussex Drive, and what is on the property there?
Well, in a nutshell, 24 Sussex Drive is the Prime Minister's residence, or at least it's supposed to be. As many people know, the current Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and the previous Prime Minister for almost a decade, Justin Trudeau, did not live at 24 Sussex because of the state of disrepair of that residence. So they have moved across the road to Rideau Cottage, which is on the grounds of the Governor General. Now, for those who haven't visited 24 Sussex and have no idea what we're talking about, or at least can't visualize what we're talking about, it's a fairly large property, certainly by urban standards. It's listed as 2.1 hectares, which is about 5 acres. It's on a prestigious road, not far from downtown Ottawa and Parliament Hill. It's only about 2 kilometers away, in fact. And it's a lovely property, and it's overlooking the Ottawa River. It's on a cliff on one side, and on the other side, it's set back quite a bit from the street, from Sussex. And the fact that it's set back and overlooking a river and has 5 acres, it's not just a lovely property, but it's good for security. And some might argue that the symbolism being on the Ottawa River has historical importance for our country, in the sense that it runs between Ontario and Quebec, mostly French-speaking province, and mostly English-speaking regions to the west. And it's kind of cool in that the house is in a political sort of neighborhood. As I mentioned, the Governor General's grounds across the road, and the French Embassy, South African consulate, stuff like that in the neighborhood. And the house itself is, despite its reputation, it's quite large. It's 35 rooms, 12,000 square feet. It doesn't really stand out for those who haven't seen it, in the sense you could drive by it and not, unlike the White House, let's say, you might not even notice it, other than the fact that there's a security station at the front of the driveway, which I don't know about you, but I don't have one of those in my place. So some might look at it and say, well, it's modestly Canadian. That's nice. It's in keeping with who we are. And some might compare it to other international leaders' homes and say, that's not good enough. So it's up for discussion.
Yeah, and for a bit of a history lesson, because it wasn't always the Prime Minister's home. Like, it didn't become the Prime Minister's home in 1867. In part, at the time, the capital wasn't even Ottawa. But when did it become the Prime Minister's official residence?
Well, it was, just to back up just a little bit, it was built right after Confederation. So 1867-68 by a lumber baron and politician named Joseph Courier. And it was built into this Gothic revival style, intending to sort of evoke Parliament buildings themselves. But it didn't become the Prime Minister's residence for a good 80 years or so. The government decided that it would become the Prime Minister's home in 1949, just a few years after the Second World War. And over the next couple of years, they made some changes, such as demolishing a tower that was apparently on the west side, stripping away a Victorian ornament, expanding its size, things like that. And the ballroom was replaced by an outdoor terrace. So significant renovations. That wasn't the end of the renovations. The Pierre Trudeau sort of famously put in a swimming pool in the 70s, things like that. But it's never been revered or admired among international leaders as one of the great leaders' residences of the world.
And even among prime ministers, what have past prime ministers said about the property?
Well, they don't tend to say too much while they're living there, for obvious reasons. You never want to be seen to be complaining too much about a 35-room home that you're not paying for. But they do sort of take little jabs at the place often after they've left office. I think both Mulroney and Chrétien, after leaving office, made some somewhat disparaging remarks about uh, 24 Sussex in their memoirs. And Paul Martin was quoted once simply as saying, "It's too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer." So, uh, yeah, it's never been seen as a great perk of the job.
Mm-hmm. And as many people know, famously, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, when he was elected in 2015, he opted not to live in 24 Sussex Drive, instead choosing to live in a home on the property where the Governor General resides, at Rideau Cottage. Why did Justin Trudeau decide not to live there? Were there any specific reasons, or was it just the totality of the issues with the home?
Yeah, I think it was just seen as it was seen as almost to the point where it was just uninhabitable, despite what to many of us might seem like a fairly opulent place. So it had a range of problems, including wiring and plumbing. Uh, there was even reportedly mold problems, asbestos, and even rats at one point. So Trudeau decided to move across the road, as you mentioned. And I'm sure they were thinking, while he's out of the place, we'll fix it up. And the question of what to do with it just sort of lingered, and no decision was made during the 9 years he was in office.
And you talk about some of these problems that led to Trudeau finally deciding, okay, this isn't the right place for the prime minister to live. And you talk about some wiring. You talk about, prime ministers past have said it's too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. So there's obviously issues with things like windows or ventilation. And we've even heard, as you mentioned, mold. There's been talk of rats. Like, what have assessments said are kind of the state of repair of the property? Is it in a state where someone could theoretically still live in it? What's the totality of the problems plaguing this residence?
Well, a few years ago, they did spend around $4 million to take care of many of those problems. So I'm assuming that the wiring and the plumbing and the rats are fixed. Uh, so is it habitable now? I would think so. I can't say for sure though, because no one's talking about it. We went to great lengths to try and get comments from various levels of government on this, and got little to nothing. And politicians don't want to really talk about it, including the prime minister. So it's difficult to say what condition it's actually in right now, other than they don't seem to want to live there. They choose to live across the road at Rideau Cottage, which is not the greatest place either. Uh, so it's hard to judge. I think we're at the point though where somebody needs to make a decision here, because most Canadians would not find it, I think, acceptable that our official prime minister's residence is not being used now for a decade.
Why have successive prime ministers opted not to fix the home? It does seem to be kind of a strange concept that we just have this nice property that we built, that we bought and we use for prime ministers as their official home to greet visiting dignitaries and things like that. Why just not fix it?
Well, that's a great question, Dave. I mean, we never want to assume too much about uh, knowing what someone's motivation for a decision, or in this case, a non-decision is. But it's hard to come up with any reason why this place has been vacant now for a historical site for our country for a decade. The only thing I can come up with is that it's just politics. That the two prime ministers involved here, Trudeau and now Carney, don't want to face the headline of the fact that they signed off on spending tens of millions of dollars, excuse me, to fix up a place that they would seem to be benefiting from because it's a place they'll eventually live. Although the renovations are such, they're extensive enough. It's highly unlikely, even Carney, who knows how long he'll be in office, but it's highly unlikely he'll ever live there, no matter what renovations they decide to go for.
We'll be right back.
It just seems like it's one of those decisions that they just don't want to own up to. It's just easier to avoid.
Has there ever been any talk of it being kind of an automatic process or handled by an outside body? Like you can't imagine that the White House in the United States would fall into a state of such disrepair that you would think that there's just someone who's like, okay, the property's looking kind of shabby. Maybe it's time to fix it up a little bit. Why is there not just an automatic process to deal with this house?
That's a great question. I haven't heard of anybody in government suggesting that process be put in place. And I would think if they wanted to do that, it wouldn't take long to set up a committee or some wing of the National Capital Commission or something like that to present options or even just to make a decision. You could get a nonpartisan group of whatever number of people, and they could be tasked with making a decision what's best, not for the current prime minister, but for the country in terms of what Canadians want in a residence for our prime ministers in the future. But that hasn't happened.
Yeah. Among the issues in the House, I think just due to the state of the property and the age of the property, I can imagine is technology and security that, things have changed over the years. And there are different threats than there were in the 1950s. What are some of the security concerns with relation to the building? And is it technologically speaking, or is it accessibility to the property?
It's difficult to say because the RCMP, who's responsible for security in this regard, was among those government bodies that that didn't want to talk about this subject. And I do understand why bodies like the RCMP don't want to discuss security matters. I think for obvious reasons. But it's, if we just use what I think might be common sense, we could say the advantages of this property are, as I think I mentioned, sitting on the edge of a cliff is an advantage perhaps for security. The fact that it's a fairly large property is a good thing. The fact that it's set back from the road is a good thing. But then you have to look also at the reality that this house was built in the 1860s. So there would be some security advantages in terms of all things digital and either doing a major renovation and bringing it up to speed on that front, or perhaps even just starting from scratch, whether it's a new home at 24 Sussex or somewhere else.
What are the options for addressing the problems with the building or the building in general? I'm sure that people in government or that there are architectural or historical experts in Ottawa who've kind of said, okay, here's what we can do. We could renovate, we could tear down and rebuild on the site. We could find a completely new site to house the prime minister. Like, what kind of things have been or are being discussed as solutions in this case?
Yeah, so from the people I spoke to, particularly the architects, many of whom are in Ottawa and know the property well, and in some cases have been involved in some designs or some thoughts about what to do on this front. The three big buckets of thought are what you alluded to. One, do a major reno of the existing building at 24 Sussex. This would be a relatively modest option to choose. Secondly, you could tear down what's there and rebuild on the site. One architect suggested to me, for historical or heritage reasons, some of the stones and things like that, even the moldings, etc., they could be kept and reused. And the third bucket would be you just start from scratch on a different site. And the advantages to that would largely be around security and just the fact you'd have a modern building and do whatever you want with it. The disadvantages would be you'd lose the historical continuity and the heritage of 24 Sussex.
Is there a cost associated with these options, and do we get a sense of what might be the most likely to happen, even if no one seems to really want to make a decision here? Do we have a sense of what might be the first choice?
No, because no one's talking about it. So
fair.
So
That's fair.
I can only go from what those outside government, as I mentioned, architects and people like that who have been thinking about this a lot. I can only use their thoughts in trying to answer that question. I think what's likely to happen is, my sense is, because there's been some recent pressure on this front, that Mark Carney will get the process going. And the path of least resistance, I would think, is to do a major renovation of the existing building. And you could add in all the digital and security things you want to take care of. You could get new air conditioning. If that wasn't taken care of already, you could perhaps build another wing or structure on the property that would be specifically designed for the business side of what you want to do at a prime minister's residence. You could have the existing home as the prime minister, for the prime minister's family, and then you could have a nearby structure, perhaps connected by a tunnel, where you could do all business things. You could host events. You could have dinner parties, and even have a prime minister's office. And that would, of course, be state-of-the-art security. But I have no reason to believe, in terms of official channels, that option is the one that's favored, because they're just not saying anything.
That's fair. Before we wrap up, in your research or your interviews with people about the home, was there anything that people said that like got to the heart of why it's important for Canada to have this, or to respect the history of this site, or at least to have something that is fitting of a prime minister? And I know people might not want to think about the prime minister having such luxuries, but ultimately the prime minister is Canada's representative who deals with international trade and deals with foreign affairs, and probably should have, if not an opulent residence, at least a modestly large place to live.
Right. And that in some ways, Dave, this decision gets to who we are as a people, as Canadians, in the sense that I think it's fair to say that we're not an ostentatious people. We don't go for the glamour and glitz that some places really enjoy, but that most Canadians, I think, would be fine with our prime minister living in a place that makes us proud, and that where that person can entertain foreign dignitaries who wouldn't see it as a substandard place, and who we can be, we can just generally feel good about the place that is a host site for many people from around the world. On the other hand, most of us would also say we always have needs in our country, what our tax dollars could be put towards. And maybe we don't want the prime minister to have to live in a palace. We don't want to pay that bill, and we don't want our leaders to think of themselves as particularly special. They work for us at the end of the day. So it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm not sure that how many Canadians will be involved in the decision-making process, but it's you don't have to dig too deeply to see why this is a politically sensitive subject for whoever's in power.
Yeah. And, we'll see. Maybe Prime Minister Mark Carney decides to finally get the ball rolling on addressing the issue. And as you say, if not for him, for the next guy or gal. But we'll see once that happens what the debate starts to look like. Simon, thanks very much for your time. 10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest, Simon Tuck. More from him at nationalpost.com. I'm Dave Breckenridge. Thanks for listening.